Alright, we'll do the winner for the ball. So before I start time, I'm a Nog from South Forsyth, and I'll be speaking first on the track. Is anyone not ready? If everyone's good, then start time now. To protect workers' rights, South Forsyth firms resolved in U.S. right-to-work laws do more harm than good. Greenhouse 22 notes that right-to-work laws are deliberately anti-union because they allow workers opt out of paying union dues while enjoying their benefits, weakening labor unions by sapping their treasuries and undercutting their power. Thus, after these laws are introduced, those who opt out of paying dues increase by up to 39%, unionization drives drop by 28%, and union victories fall by 46%. This is bad for three reasons. Contention one is the middle class. Pew Trust explains that the middle class has steadily contracted in the past 5 decades. However, Madeline 21 finds that unions offer workers a route out of poverty and into the middle class because they enjoy higher wages, which is why the typical union household has twice the net wealth of the typical non-union household. Erickson 21 concludes that declines in unionization account for nearly 35% of the falling share of the middle class. And if union rates were the same in 2013 as in 1979, then wages would be nearly 5% higher for even non-union workers. Cugler 22 concludes that low-income people entering the middle class bolster economic growth. However, when it weakens, the economic growth rate drops from 4% to 3%. Brandon 13 notes that if the economy still grew at 4% each year, then 3 million people would not be in poverty today. Contention 2 is public health. This could be thought of in a couple of ways. First, Pitach 22 notes that unionized workers are 12% more likely to be covered by insurance, which is why Walter 12 concludes that if coverage were reduced to states with these laws, then 2 million fewer people would have health insurance. Name 20 finds that a decline in union density explains approximately 1/4 of the decline in aggregate health insurance. Ultimately, Goodman 17 explains that nearly 45,000 annual deaths are associated with low health insurance. Second, the AFL 22 reports that 125,000 workers are killed each year by job-related hazards. Fox 16 furthers that states with right-to-work laws have a 54% higher rate of workplace fatalities. This is because unions have greater bargaining power to negotiate for better safety conditions. For example, Dean 22 finds that stronger nursing unions could have prevented 25,000 worker infections and saved 8,000 nursing home residents during the pandemic. Empirically, Name 20 explained that unions could use their collective bargaining power to increase safety in the work environment, which is why a 10% increase in unionization rates during the pandemic would have reduced COVID cases by 5%, saving millions of lives. Contention 3 is racism. Rosenfield 15 notes that African Americans have the highest union organization rates of any group today. Historically, white supremacist Vance Lewis designed laws to reverse this trend. He hated unions because he feared that if unions united working class whites and African Americans, it would upend the Jim Crow laws of the South, which is why when Truman moved forward on civil rights, segregationists voted for RTW. Even today, right-to-work laws exacerbate racism in 2 ways. First, Wilson 18 finds that a larger share of African Americans are affected by a change affecting union representation. Thus, Spivak 19 finds that unionization levels decline largely because of RTW. But if they were at their 1970 levels, then black-white weekly wage gaps would be 30% lower today. Second, Bond 21 finds that unions foster support for public policies benefiting black communities because unionized workers are more likely to support affirmative action in government efforts to improve their standing. Osher 21 finds that unions have been central to help pass the Voting Rights Act and the post-Georgia voter suppression bill, while also mobilizing votes and electing working-class candidates. Thus, while 13 out of 17 high union density states didn't pass any voter restrictions, a total of 26 voter suppression laws were passed among the 17 low union density states, which increased the racial voting turnout gap. The impact is twofold. First, many too argues that to accept the racist universe to the slightest degree is to endorse fear, injustice, and violence. You cannot found a legislative order on racism because it signifies the exclusion of another from those benefits. Second, McKinsey finds that closing the wealth gap at 1.5 trillion to the U.S. economy in 2028. Thus, we are proud to affirm.
Caroline and I will date. Our sole contention is helping workers. in 2021 writes that the labor movement is plagued by rampant corruption, with thousands of leaders having been convicted. Forsyth confirms that it is not a coincidence that most corruption occurs in states without right-to-work laws. Simon 21 reasons that a lack of right-to-work laws have fostered a culture of corruption. Because union leaders know that no matter what, they will receive money from workers, they can use this money for their own gains. Luckily, Simon finds that union members who suspect their money isn't being used for proper purposes can fight back by cutting off financial support. Thus, Combs 19 concludes that non-right-to-work states have seen a drop in membership over time compared to their right-to-work counterparts. That's why Vincent 16 finds that union membership in right-to-work states grew by 1.3%, but fell by 9% in non-right-to-work states. Reforming union practices is key, as Bugden 10 explains that labor unions exercise unchallenged control over union pension funds. This leads to misused funds, as NRTCW 22 explains that union officials routinely wield them to burden their citizens with more debt as well as heavier taxation. Thus, NRTWC confirms that union pension funds in non-right-to-work states are 43% more underfunded than right-to-work states. Ensuring pension longevity is crucial, as Millard in 2012 concludes that uncorrupted, well-funded pensions have lifted 4.7 million families out of poverty. The second way is through economic growth. Right-to-work laws are vital in economic growth as they foster more competitive environments for both employees and businesses. Epstein 20 warrants that by minimizing barriers placed by unions, more jobs are created through trade prospects. Epstein continues that an absence of right-to-work laws have prevented job creation and economic prosperity because it shrinks overall wealth by directing resources to less productive ends. With higher labor and bargaining costs, unions undercut gains from workers. Furthermore, they increase the chance of market disruption and thus harm all workers, union and non-union alike. In addition, investors perceive RTWs as debt-friendly economic policy. Wagner 13 finds that states that have enacted right-to-work laws are rewarded by investors with borrowing costs that are 20 basis points lower than states without the law. Thus, Shirk 11 concludes that right-to-work states are much more attractive for business investment. In fact, businesses consider the presence of right-to-work laws a major factor when deciding where to locate. Cabello 21 corroborates that RTW laws act as a signal to foreign firms. These laws function as a tool for more competitive state and local economies, as well as the job market itself, leading to more recruitment efforts and 50% more projects compared to states without such laws. Hence, the UN 22 finds that RTW laws significantly encourage corporate innovation because more worker autonomy, companies are able to diverge from the binds of bargaining contracts. Overall, Letter 14 quantifies that RTWs increase employment by 105%, increase economies by 11.5%, and the total estimated income loss from the lack of RTWs is $647 billion. The impact is recessions. Nesbitt 22 finds that household income and wages grew faster in RTW states in the first few years after the recession ended. Fowler 21 explains that manufacturers experienced 300% higher recoveries than different sectors. These booms led to economic growth across industries and were a major factor in the country's successful emergence from each recession. This would be devastating. In 08 alone, Boston University quantifies that 100 million people around the world fell into extreme poverty.
Can I go for some evidence? The first thing was, we can just look at it.
Yeah.
Vincent 16. And then 43% more underfunding. I'm gonna pause. I'm just gonna leave it on. That's fine. Otherwise, yes. 43% better funding. Are you for the last question? So on state, or like on the investor confidence, Wagner evidence talks about company unions increasing state budgets. In 2018, the Supreme Court passed that every single public union is not allowed to manage fair share fees. Why does it matter if we have right to work laws in the state or not?
We'd say that just the perception of right to work laws being enacted in the state attracts investors in the first place, which is why our evidence indicates that in right to work states, overall there is far more investment in state economy. Can I ask you a question?
But no, you didn't answer my question. The attraction from investors is because of lower state spending costs. But if state spending costs are the same in every state, because public sector unions are independent of right to work laws, why do right to work laws directly affect them?
We'd say that just because right to work laws foster a pro-business environment in the state in general, that alone also attracts investors as well as like the other more immediate. Can I ask you a question? So let's talk about your argument regarding public health.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Let's talk about your argument regarding safety.
Yeah.
Why do right to work states have like safety measures imposed if they don't want like everyone dying on the job?
Well, because it costs money to actually.
But like it also costs money to like not have employees working at the job.
Well, I mean, insofar as like the occupational mortality rate is significantly higher in states with right to work laws, it means that these companies don't really take that into account, right? I'm glad you're thinking further ahead. Can I ask a question?
You're not answering my question.
I am. I'm saying that these workers, these companies don't want to pay for higher safety, which is why collective bargaining is necessary. That's why a 10% increase in unionization would have decreased COVID cases by 5% because they'd be able to collectively bargain for better working conditions.
Alright, finish the question.
Alright, sure. So your Austin Lilly study from Harvard says that right to work laws decrease bargaining by 1% because they hurt unions. Then your Mackert study says that they strengthen unions. Which one is it?
You didn't call for any of this evidence.
Because I cut it. I read it on the net, right? So your Harvard evidence about Austin says from the very beginning, the methodology that it uses says that right to work laws decrease unionization rates, right? Your Mackert evidence says that, oh, right to work laws increase unionization rates. That sounds kind of mutually exclusive. Which one is it?
We'd say that it actually increases unionization rates, and our evidence gives you the warrant behind it, right? It increases unionization rates because overall, unions are encouraged to perform better because if they're not guaranteed a steady stream of funding, then they're always forced to perform better on the job.
Okay, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
So are unions good or bad for business?
Like unions themselves.
Are strong unions good or bad for business?
Yeah.
Like good for business?
Yeah, we say that.
So
Yeah,
you agree that unions are good?
Like, yeah, we're not denying that unions are good. We say that we make them better in our way.
That's not what your evidence is. Be honest with me.
Okay, so let's talk about your argument on like public policy. So what specifically did like unions do when lobbying for these laws?
There's two things. Like first, they help pass the Voting Rights Act.
Well, like
Get out to vote programs. That would allow stuff to
like what did those do?
They got people to vote
Well, like how?
because they had get out to vote programs that encourage the members to vote for certain policies.
Well, like what?
And then also that's not right. We're gonna have some questions. Can I see the Harvard study and then the Harvard studies? Just. Just for coaches in the round, like we would prefer that you don't use technology. That's fine. We're gonna start with Zoom.
ready, then my time will begin. Now, let's look at their first argument of union practices. Let's look at their argument. They contend that unions are strengthened by right to work laws. There's a couple of problems here. First, better studies show that right to work laws don't cause unions to actually shift strategies. For example, Zula 20 found that there was evidence that the union shift additional resources towards representation or that administrations are cut back. This contradicts the popular argument that the competition forces unions to be attentive to member needs. You prefer our greenhouse evidence here since it finds that because of the free rider problems, unions are much less successful in states with right to work laws. So if anything, all you're doing is hurting unions on the neck. But then they argue that right to work laws provide competition to unions, but unions already face stiff competition from their already well-funded employers. For example, Greenhouse 22 quantifies that businesses outspent labor's unions 16 to 1 in elections and 3 billion to 48 million in lobbying. This means that they have to compete more against lobbying from corporations than against right to work laws. Right to work laws are completely unneeded. Let's look at a specific study about activists. First, the study's numbers are statistically irrelevant. It only finds a 0.029% increase in standard deviation of life satisfaction and 0.054 increase in their economic sentiment from right to work laws. That's essentially impossible to weigh. You should prefer more recent data from the EPI 21 that finds that high union density translates into $6,000 to high median incomes, 19% higher minimum wages, and 4.5% lower uninsured rate, as well as a universal expansion of Medicaid. But then second, their study also has zero viable comparable metrics to actually show that unions are more effective in right to work states. They just say that unions are more effective. Greenhouse, however, actually quantifies that unions are 23% lower efficacy, and unions actually drive rates in states with right to work laws due to free riders. But then third, they try linking it through their Harvard study. Their Harvard study says that unions decrease with right to work laws, which is why right to work is good. Make them pick a lane. Either unions are good or bad. The entire link about business investments, about perception of strong unions, is unions are strong. That decreases business investment. But then let's look at their impact of pensions. Unions allow for more access to pensions. As Green 22 explains that according to 2020 data, 91% of union workers have access to a retirement plan compared to only 65% of non-union workers. But then also, unions offer pensions already, as Walters and Michelle Oakley explained. The unionized workers receive better pension plans and their employers contribute 28% more towards pensions. You prefer this evidence over theirs since access to pensions supersedes the quality of pensions in the first place, because if you don't have pensions in the first place, quality doesn't matter. On their second argument of economic growth. First, more credible studies actually disprove their entire argument. Their studies that compare averages and control for a limited number of variables have been shown to be flawed, as K15 points out that most of the comprehensive study by the EPI, which controlled for 42 factors, found that right to work laws had no effect on economic growth. Manson 21 supports this by presenting data on 20 economic and social indicators, which demonstrate that reducing the power of workers has a negative effect on growth and reduces access to good and family sustainable jobs. But then, second, the empirics are on our side, as K furthers that the growth of Oklahoma's economy was due to an increase in oil and gas prices, not right to work laws. Layford 11 notes that a study conducted by researchers at the University of Kentucky, which analyzed state economic performance in the southern U.S. from 1964 to 2004, so it's a holistic study, found no correlation between right to work status and state economic outcomes. At that point, their contention is there's no link here. On business investment, first, there is no link. Business confidence is significantly lower in right to work states, as Towns 15 finds that the difference in business investment is between 70 and 120 million in right to work states compared to non-right to work states. At that point, if you're doing anything on the negative, decreasing business investment. But then second, their evidence is about public sector unions boosting state budgets. It's game over when the Janus Act already exempts public sector unions from right to work laws and makes it unconstitutional for all right to work laws to ever include them. Let's look on innovation. First, Biggie 16 reports the findings of a report about the top 1,000 most innovative companies in the world and found no significant relationship between R&D spending and sustained performance, boosted economic growth, or higher innovation. In fact, the top 10 most innovative companies in the entire world are really the top 10 spenders on R&D each year. On the recession argument, you turn it because of wages. The most long-term study by several Princeton economists in 2018 found that unions consistently have provided workers with a 10 to 20% higher wage boost over their non-union counterparts over the past 8 decades. This is key to averting recessions because that's 80% of the GDP is consumer spending. So if anything on their world, all you're doing is going to be having a more likely recession. At the end of the day, is a clear outcome. Thank you.
provided. Then, they say this contradicts our argument about economic growth. No, it doesn't. Our economic growth is perception-based. It's the warranting that investors see that when a state has passed right to work laws, it's better for business autonomy, worker autonomy, and thus investors go in. Then, they say that unionized workers have better access to pensions. Maybe, but our evidence finds that right-to-work states, unions specifically, have far better access to pensions than non-right-to-work states. Regarding our argument about the economy, first, they bring a bunch of evidence as to how right-to-work laws do not factor in economic growth. A, warranting is conceded that investors are more likely to go in, which is why they have conceded that we saw 50% more projects in states with right-to-work laws, and they've conceded that we've seen if every state had adopted a right-to-work law, we would have significantly more money in their pockets today. With that, their only example is about Oklahoma. Our case is holistic and controls for other factors and found that economic growth happened. Then, they say that there's less business investment when states adopt right-to-work laws. Again, no warranting. They have conceded that far more investors perceive that right-to-work laws are the #1 thing that gets investors to go in the first place. They say that this is about public sector industries. No, they are missing the warranting in case that specific businesses with right-to-work laws adapted in that state are perceived as better for investment in the first place. Finally, they talk about higher wages and innovation producing better economic growth. That's just their case. I'll get to it there. With their case, remember, this debate is not about whether unions are good or bad. Their entire case is presented on union decline. But if we win, that unions are actually stronger in a world where right-to-work laws are enforced, we win this debate. With that, the Wiseman writes that the effect of right-to-work laws unfold gradually and actually encourage unions to be more proactive and sustainable, thus finding better healthcare, better worker safety, and doing better for all of the things that they talk about. Thus, break the clash with Vernuccio. Vernuccio was a study controlled for 10 years and found that over a 10-year-long period, right-to-work states saw a 1.3% increase in unions, while non-right-to-work states saw a 9% drop. With that, let's go to their argument about the middle class. First, there are other incentives to keep wages high. For instance, employers do not want everybody quitting on the job, which is why a study from PC writes that this controlled for other factors and indicated that in right-to-work states, we actually saw an increase in wages by 6.7%. Why, when there's more economic growth, the companies can actually afford to increase the wages in the long term. Regarding public health, first, healthcare insurance is guaranteed regardless. For instance, the Affordable Care Act ensures that 95% of people get access to healthcare. Then, they talk about safety, but there are other ways to implement safety. For instance, OSHA writes that insurers employ workplace safety via a regulation, which is why empirically our evidence controlled for other factors and found that right-to-work laws did not have an influence. Regarding their argument about inequality, it's historically untrue, as Holder writes that right-to-work laws have had no significant effect on income equality. They talk about unions representing people, but in right-to-work, without unions have empirically represented things like police unions have harmed racism because they empirically represent sides that have contributed to racism, and Flint indicates that right-to-work states have sided with police brutality.
Is your Harvard study from Austin and Louis true?
Maybe some parts, but I'll remember some parts. Can I get a question?
I mean, insofar as the Austin and Louis study says that right-to-work laws or like the right-to-work laws strengthen unions, but your entire arguments are based on the fact of perception, as you tell me in rebuttal, that businesses are going to go in based on perception. Are you saying that short-term economic growth is a lot better than long-term economic growth?
A, it's long-term economic growth because there's more projects over a longer period of time. But B, here's the warranting. We say that in right-to-work states, we actually saw an increase in unions for the Biden evidence. We also saw an increase in business investment. The two can both be true. Our argument is that investors are more encouraged to invest when they see that states have adopted more business-friendly policies that increase worker mobility. Whether or not it's perception or not, the two things have empirically been true, which is why it's pretty clean. Can I get a question?
Sure.
So let's talk about
of the American population would not be uninsured. I think that statistic.
Okay. So
Question.
the problem with that is that like people are uninsured because of a variety of alt causes.
You just said the Affordable Care Act solves.
Yeah, I think it does solve substantially more than unions because only like 6% of people are on unions, whereas most people are covered under the Affordable Care Act. But you can make a question.
Okay. Okay, so you go ahead and talk about police unions on racism, but insofar as police unions are public unions and right to work laws, because of the NSD Act, completely has to like exclude police or public unions. How do you solve racism?
I'm not saying I solve for racism. I'm just saying that unions empirically have not been good about dealing with racism. Can I get a question?
Can I get a quick follow-up if you don't mind?
I mean, you just have a question. I don't want. Okay, so regarding the economy, you say that there's less business investment on right to work laws than in the past. Why?
Oh, it's on your case, like you're my bro. Yeah. So what the argument is what happens when right to work laws are actually put into place in these in these states is that since unions decline, workers are less likely to be more productive, right? And if workers are less likely to be more productive, then businesses, like the entire business value goes down. Insofar as the business value goes down, investors don't see the point of actually investing in the company, which is why the 70 to 120 million difference actually exists between right to work states and non-right to work states. Another question. Okay, so you go ahead and talk about you go ahead and talk about how like pension access still increases, but insofar as pension access is already increasing by 28% under unions, why are right to work states? Why are like
so
right to work laws?
increasing under unions, yes, but in right to work states we say that they're empirically 43% more funded, which is again proof of the argument that unions are stronger and better at appropriating funds when right to work laws are provided, and that's for us.
Now we just look about it and that's what all the judges about as well.
So it's just going to be like talking about like overview about like strengthening unions, our case, Wayne, and then maybe your case. Alright? Does that sound good? Is anyone not ready? Everyone's good at start time. They essentially concede that unions are good, but they don't have an essential narrative throughout their case. Here's 3 reasons why right to work laws hurt unions. First, they consider a court evidence which finds that there's a 29% increase in free riders. That's because right to work laws don't allow unions to mandate dues. They're going to come up here and say, oh, at least they have competition. But what they don't understand is the Zulu evidence finds that corporations already give enough competition for unions because they're always lobbying against them, forcing them to have better benefits, whether or not in right to work states. However, the capability of them to give better benefits is severely diminished in states with right to work laws because their treasuries are severely undercut. They don't frontline the Zulu evidence, don't let them come up and do it in like second summer. Second of all, their Harvard study cold concedes that the main reason that right to work laws increase economic growth is not by strengthening unions, but by weakening the strength of unions. Ask yourself logically, why do businesses perceive states with right to work laws as better? Because they don't want to deal with stronger unions. If in their world they're arguing that they strengthen unions, they A, double turn themselves because their second contention literally is like terminal defense on their case because it literally says that right to work laws weaken unions, which is why right to work laws are good. But then they can't read contradicting arguments and then go for either or. Make them pick a lane in their rebuttal themselves. Let's look at our case. Right to work laws are historically racist because the person who made right to work laws, Vance Muse, was a white supremacist who hated unions because he feared that they would unite working class whites and blacks. Today, racism exacerbated in two ways. First, these spiving evidence finds that because people in unions are largely people of color, any change affecting union density or quality hurts them. That's why if unions did decline in the 1970s, the black-white wage gap would be 30% lower today. But for this evidence, because it looks at the empirics, whereas their evidence is looking at speculation that hasn't happened yet. Second, Bond finds that unions temper racial resentment and boost support for public policies that benefit black workers, like the Voting Rights Act. Racism outweighs their impacts and should be prioritized before all else around. A, they can see the many evidence. It's clear that if you accept a racist legislation to even the slightest degree, their impact becomes immoral, no matter how much economic growth or manufacturing that they have. The only way they can win this round now is to prove to you that unions are stronger. Second, if unions are stronger and then police unions are bad, then they double turn themselves. Again, they're probably not going to go for the fact that unions are stronger and stick with right to work laws because they say police unions are racist, meaning that they're strengthening police unions. Then, the only turn that they have on racism is about police unions. But the Yanis Act exempts public sector unions from right to work laws. Police unions also have other things like qualified immunity, which prevent them and there's alternative causes for brutality, which are correlation not causation. On their case, they can see the Princeton evidence, which finds that 10 to 20% of wages, after looking at a most holistic study, finds that there's 20% higher wages in states without right to work laws. Why does this matter? Wages make up 70% of consumer spending. That means that A, no business investment will occur in a state with low consumer spending because businesses obviously will not want to invest in that. B, you're always going to vote for a team that sponsors 70% of GDP growth by boosting wages. And C, they can see that this wage growth is at the bottom level rather than their wage growth, which is at the top level and then trickles down. It's a clean vote for the affirmative.
We're just going to run the microphone. I'll start.
Right to work is really good because it fosters a growth
our first argument. That's not true. We'd say that if unions are overall performing better, then that means that workers are probably more productive in the workplace, which therefore leads to higher investment. But also we'd say that it's just a perception argument, because if investors see that right to work laws are enacted themselves, they're automatically going to come in. With that, let's talk about their argument. In their last speech and in their rebuttal, they concede our argument about corruption, which is round-ended. We tell you that right to work laws are really, really critical because they don't get rid of all unions, but simply the bad ones. They act as a litmus test to see which unions are good and which ones are bad, which is why our evidence indicates that right to work laws actually increase unionization rates by 1.3% because unions are not always guaranteed a steady stream of funding. This means that their argument is, if you're going to vote for their argument, you're going to vote for the neg. Because if you want to buy that unions are really, really good in promoting racial equality, then you're obviously going to vote for us because we improve unions and therefore improve their own impact. With that, let's go on to the way. We'd say that our evidence indicates that since right-to-work laws boost worker productivity and increase business investment, right-to-work creates statewide economic growth, which boosts income by 11.5%. That's why Glantz concludes that right-to-work states have lower inequality, which vastly overweighs their argument because they're only limited to union workers, while our argument affects every single person in the country. Even then, they're not winning their own arguments because they concede in rebuttal that right-to-work laws have little impact on income inequality. Yeah.
Why do right-to-work laws foster pro-business environments?
Because there's more worker mobility, and even if there's still unions, the unions aren't corrupt and spending that money for
That's not what
things
your
like
evidence
fraud
says.
and embezzlement.
Your evidence just says that businesses don't want to deal with the funds of unions because it increases borrowing costs. Insofar as you strengthen unions, are stronger unions going to increase borrowing costs? Yes or no?
So that's what our evidence said on the public sector argument. We're not going for that argument.
Your business investment talks about perceptions of investment being safer, correct? Why are investments safer? Because borrowing costs are lower.
Yeah, that's not.
But if borrowing costs are lower as a result of weaker unions and stronger unions increase borrowing costs, do you understand how your second contention is a terminal difference?
No. It is a perception warrant.
Okay.
Let me make that clear. Investors, whether or not there are less unions or not less unions, investors perceive that right-to-work laws open up more business-oriented policies because there's more things like worker mobility, less corruption, which is all conceded by
None of your evidence
We've been
says
on this
that.
for a while. Can I get a question?
I mean, sure. None of your evidence says that.
Can I get a
It's
shot?
just hearsay. You guys can.
So if unions are corrupt and not like funding money rights, doesn't that mean that it's like not empirically going to help reducing racial inequality?
No. Why? Insofar as if unions did decline with the right to work laws, the wage gap would be 30% more today. That means that unions weren't corrupt. That means that right to work laws did more harm than good. Right? Second of all, we would argue that this corruption that occurs, you never implicated to why it diminishes their ability to collectively bargain for higher wages.
Even if it diminishes their ability to collectively bargain, it does diminish their ability to actually do all the things that you talked about. Because if the money is directed towards things like political lobbying, fraud, and embezzlement, it doesn't actually help things like reduce the pay gap.
Wait, so then why would the wage gap be 30% lower if we didn't have right to work laws? Why is that true if unions were corrupt?
That's just like some study. I don't know how that's really accurate.
Wait, but it's an actual study. Like,
Okay, there's no warranty, but also we
It is
say that
warranty.
if
It's a
unions overall improve,
No.
and that same logic should apply like here too.
The question, okay, just because you solve for union corruption doesn't mean you solve for their ability to collectively bargain.
But the fact of the matter is that you have conceded
You're not letting me
in
finish
today's
my
speech that
response.
unions increased 1.3% when right-to-work laws were adopted. That means that there's more unions, there's more ability to solve for things like structural
Okay, can I finish my response to your question?
Yes.
Okay. So, I first of all, I do respond to it. I say that this is because the incentive structure didn't change. It's the same in every state. Second of all, your Harvard study does a meta-analysis and finds that right-to-work laws weaken unions, and you prefer our Fordham evidence, which says that the efficacy is decreased by 46%. I give all of those points in some. So don't say I don't. We're going to run some
sitting in already. Everybody's ready. Time. At the end of the day, both teams agree that unions are good. Time and time again, however, the conceded foreign evidence which finds that a right to work laws boost free riders and unions by 29%, which undercut their treasuries and prevent them from being able to do organizing or any other thing that corrupts workers. This means that through their case, though even like their case may solve for the intent of unions, our case solves for the capability of unions to organize and help workers in the first place. Here's the issue with their argument, though, about strengthening unions. Unions always have an incentive to provide competitive services, so they have to counter corporate lobbying. However, this incentive needs to be backed up by the capability to actually do things in the first place, like strikes and collective bargaining, which is only strengthened in the affirmative world because right-to-work laws inherently harm them. A weak prereq their weighing on scope and time frame, though, even if they solve for economic growth, because McKinsey finds that closing the wage gap would add $2.3 trillion to the economy, meaning you can't have good economic growth if you're losing 4% of your GDP just to a racial wealth gap. Let's go into our contention on racism. Right-to-work laws are historically racist. They concede the many evidence which finds that no matter how good a legislation is today, you cannot found a moral order on a historically racist piece of legislation since it endorses fear, violence, and injustice in return of some vague ideas of economic growth that they can't even quantify. Even today, right-to-work laws hurt racism. It hurt racism if unions' ability to destroy collective bargaining due to right-to-work. And then, due to right-to-work didn't decrease, the wage gap would be 30% lower today. They never extend anything here through summary. Don't let them come up here and new arguments and final focus. Let's go on to their case. Then on their case, they concede the evidence that says that right-to-work laws decrease wages by 20%. That's 70% of consumer spending decimates business investments by making investments look unsafe and severely mitigating, ultimately, if anything, making recessions worse in their case and harming economic growth. Then they just say that right-to-work laws foster a pro-business environment. Ask yourself why. There's studies from the Harvard Business Law, they cite that businesses hate unions, call for further evidence. If right-to-work laws strengthen unions, then investors would obviously perceive those changes, decreasing investment. That means A, right-to-work laws don't actually strengthen unions, or B, investment decreases. They haven't picked a lane yet, thus it's a clear affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna run the rest of our practice.
companies have more money so they can actually afford to increase wages in the first place, which was now. But when there are better policies that implement competition, there's a better incentive to improve all of the benefits and decrease racism in the long term.
Good round,
Great round.
Good round, guys.